everyone, and welcome to our chat about why we need more accessibility designers. I'm so grateful to be able to join AxCon 2022. I got to join last year for the first time. It was such a pleasure to do that, so I'm thrilled to be back. Now, before we get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, some stuff I'm working on, and all of that cool stuff. So let's get into it. My name is Anna Cook, or Anna E. Cook. I use the pronouns she, her, or they, them. I'm really comfortable with either. I am a senior accessibility designer at Northwestern Mutual and a master's student at the ATLAS Institute of CU-Boulder. Now, in academia and industry alike, I've chosen to specialize in designing digital experiences that are as inclusive as possible, focusing in particular on accessibility. I am currently working on a book that is hopefully going to be coming out either late this fall or next spring. I enjoy hiking, video games, 2 cats, and if you see or hear them, it's because they like joining me and talking at the same time I do. And so that's kind of a little bit about me. And today I am wearing a purple plum colored shirt, a black cardigan, and I am a white woman with pale skin and blue eyes and strawberry blonde hair that's kind of short. So that's kind of a little bit about me. So as promised, today we're going to discuss why we need more accessibility designers. But also we're going to discuss why we haven't had many accessibility designers up until recently, and still we need more. We'll get into what it means to be an accessibility designer and how you might begin to ramp up your skills. We won't get into the business case for accessibility today, largely because I want to focus in on this subject and talk about what it really means to do this type of work so that you are empowered to practice this in your skill set. To start us off, I want to take a few moments to discuss why we don't already have more people with the title and responsibilities of accessibility designer or inclusivity designer. Because up until recently, titles like these were rare and even unheard of, even though we've known about accessibility for decades. And rather, I should say not decades, but legally we've understood the implications of an inaccessible experience for decades. We've had WCAG for decades. So why are these roles new, and why haven't they been created up until recently? Well, I'll mention a little bit about my career here and kind of frame that story in terms of my personal experience. So when I started my career, I didn't even know a role like mine could exist or ever exist, let alone what it could possibly mean to be an accessibility designer. And although I have the title and responsibilities of accessibility designer now, this is a relatively new development in my career. I've been in design jobs for 10 years, 10 years reunion of my career next month, but I haven't had this title of accessibility designer until last May. I was exposed to accessibility relatively early in my career though, and largely because of coincidence and my personal interest. Ramping up that skill set, I had to choose to do that. And so it's a rare skill set still, and that's not really how it should be. Designers should have the option of learning more about accessibility, and we should by default have a set of baseline skills to make sure that we can make an experience more accessible and more inclusive and meet the needs of our users. Well, the thing is, I was exposed to accessibility early, again, largely by coincidence. A lot of designers don't have access to that type of education in their educational means. So through higher education, through self-teaching, through boot camps, accessibility isn't really prioritized or really explained in depth in our processes in those settings yet. We're rarely asked to make time for it in our work still, learn about it or practice it, but why is that? In August of last year, I conducted a survey using Twitter asking digital designers to self-identify how much they felt they were taught about accessibility when they went through their education. Now, I did clarify that that could include university, boot camp, self-teaching. These are all valid forms of education. 1,311 designers responded to this over the course of 7 days. 8% said they had a lot of accessibility education. 34% said they had a little accessibility education. And 58% said they had no accessibility education. That means over half of designers that filled out the survey, and probably at large, felt they had no accessibility education. And those who did often said they only had a little, which means designers don't feel prepared to have these conversations yet. In higher education, 50% of institutions across the United States said they had faculty teaching accessibility in their human-computer interaction programs and related tech programs. Yet, those faculty were most likely to identify themselves as only having some knowledge of accessibility. Of the surveyed faculty, 10.7% said they were not knowledgeable, 66.1% said they had some knowledge, and 18.7% said they were knowledgeable, while only 4.5% said they were experts. Now, keep in mind that folks do not always acknowledge their expertise. There is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And so this may be data that could be, variable with some subject to subjectivity, But between these two surveys, what we can take away is that digital designers are entering industry roles feeling unprepared to handle accessibility considerations, and that higher ed, at least, and likely other institutions, are feeling like they're not able to prepare designers enough yet. So then why has accessibility not been prioritized in our education? Well, there could be many reasons for this, and I think certainly societal understanding or lack thereof around disabilities and accessibility is part of that story. But it's also quite likely that our educational institutions are responding in part to industry practice, or again, a lack thereof. Many organizations have struggled to implement digital accessibility practice or policy, even though guidelines for this exist already. And I'm specifically referring to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. Those have existed since 1999, which is over 20 years. When organizations have created digital accessibility policies, it's often been in response to lawsuits, meaning that teams have a far more reactive approach to accessibility at times. Instead of creating holistic accessibility policy and practice, many organizations have looked at accessibility as a matter of compliance. So hiring for accessibility roles and skills has been rare, especially for designers, and often reactionary. But that's changing. We're starting to see a shift in accessibility skills for designers, and they're starting to be seen as important. Roles like mine are being created more and more. According to a study referenced by Teach Access, 93% of industry leaders such as Apple, Microsoft, Google, and more say that industry demand for accessibility skills is going to increase. And the important thing about this data, besides the fact that it's quite substantial, is that it was gathered in 2018, which means the shift is likely already happening, and I personally can attest that it is, and it's going to continue happening. Up until recently, the expectation was that testing and development teams were the main accessibility resources. This is because early on in digital accessibility advocacy, accessibility was intentionally prioritized in testing first. It had to be something practical, immediately applicable, and measurable, We had to show organizations that there were issues happening and to show them that that impact was significant. The focus on testing came first because testers could find issues and measure them. But then that made it so that accessibility considerations were always remediations and fixed after development occurred. This amplified the cost of accessibility significantly, requiring teams to go back and redevelop entire projects and systems. Advocates then began prioritizing accessibility checks during development, shifting the process left. But even then, that wasn't enough. The same issues could occur when emphasizing accessibility in testing and development first. When emphasizing accessibility during testing or even development alone, it means that designs have already been prepared and handed off, though, of course, this depends a little bit on the team's process, right? Waterfall or agile. Regardless, it means that accessibility issues were being baked into designs, making it difficult and even impossible for developers to fix. In a study conducted by DQ, they found that 67% of accessibility issues can originate in design with us. Developers and testers were disempowered to fix everything, and the things that they could fix often required workarounds. We were still making accessibility a remediation. Now we're looking to really shift accessibility left, right, as far as we can go and as right as we can go, so that we are holistically considering accessibility across our practice and process. Holistic accessibility requires dedicated support across the team from all team members. It requires everyone to be engaged, educated, and involved. So that's kind of why we don't have many accessibility designers yet, but let's talk about why we need more accessibility-focused designers. Well, as I mentioned, 67% of accessibility issues can originate in design. The cost of fixing design mistakes can be amplified as issues move across a product cycle. It can take 6 times longer to fix defects in development, 12 times longer to fix them in testing, and 30 times longer to fix them in production. And this applies to any defect, not even an accessibility-related defect. We always have, as an industry, or rather, there's been this bias, I should say, that accessibility can be too expensive to have baked into our product. But perhaps the reason that perception exists is because it's being prioritized too late, and the cost of fixing something at that point is increased significantly. To address this, we need to integrate accessibility into design considerations and look at user needs, not just technical requirements. In digital products, when we encounter any type of problem, we look to our product owners and our designers to understand that problem, research solutions, ideate on concepts, and test those concepts with users. We do this so that we can evaluate our ideas before they're built and make sure that what we are creating works well and that we're spending our time and money effectively. Designers and product teams must help bake accessibility into a product lifecycle for it to be truly proactive about accessibility rather than reactive. But then you might be wondering, what accessibility considerations should live in design? Accessible design considerations are far more than color contrast alone. So let's look at this together using the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as a guide. Shell Little, a fellow inclusive designer who also presented at AXCON yesterday, definitely recommend checking out her talk, assessed this. Shell thought about all the WCAG items in 2.1 and considered if there was a QA bug, who would need to be in the room to make sure that that bug was being fixed correctly. Assessing for WCAG for both A and AA levels of acceptance, Shell found that 64% of those criteria were related to design, 22 were related specifically to development, and 14 were related to both. Now, when we think back, right, on that earlier percentage, 67% of accessibility defects can originate in design. 64 of WCAG items being related to design doesn't seem that far off. When looking at WCAG criteria related to design, we can even match guidelines to certain roles and responsibilities. 18 of these criteria can apply to interaction design, 14 to content design, and 7 to visual design. For interaction designers, we consider moving parts of an experience and the story that's being told in the experience. We consider user flows, what things do, what interactions occur. This can include things like animations, bypass blocks, focus, hover, layout, navigation, pointer gestures, tab order, and timing, as well as more. For content designers, we focus on accessible alternatives like alt text, captioning, and transcripts. We also look at accessible structure and taxonomy through headings, page titles, and purposeful link text and button text. Content designers play a huge role in clear labels, instructions, and error identification as well. And then visual designers create color systems with relational colors and sufficient contrast. And they use that color along with other indicators to create a visual system. They support consistent visual identification related to iconography and typography, as well as many other visual elements. Now keep in mind that all of these cover WCAG alone, but there's more that happens beyond WCAG that designers can account for. And also remember that design roles can be intersectional. So you may find as a designer, you're doing color contrast work one day, maybe you're more interaction focused another. I know that some of these can vary depending on our titles, our roles, and our organizations. But no matter what, these are all design considerations relating to accessibility guidelines. So we know that accessibility design positions have been rare and that we're going to need more accessibility designers. But then what does an accessibility designer do? Now keep in mind, what I'm going to be talking about in this section, they can be applied, all of these concepts will be applied differently depending on your scale and your organization. The role I'm in currently is a pretty large scale design org, and so that's the perspective I'll bring to what I'll be talking about. Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that no matter how mature your accessibility organization is, accessibility designers are always advocating, the same way we are always advocating for all users. Even when we have leadership buy-in, we will always find new people that come into the org who need to be educated and brought into the fold. We will always be advocating for accessibility to create more roles, get more funding, and prioritize what we do. Advocacy also means finding ways to standardize accessibility practices in our products themselves, across an organization, for employees, and with partners and vendors. This can include accessibility governance, policies, statements, and voluntary product accessibility templates, or VPATs. Even with the title of accessibility designer, there is still a need to navigate enterprise adoption and advocate for accessibility. Accessibility designers also need to be able to support product teams when dealing with more complex questions. Even when we've created the frameworks, systems, tools, and baseline knowledge to make designs more accessible, there are always going to be situations that arise within product teams that require more advanced expertise. Matt May's quote on this is very helpful. Basically, Matt May has been known to say that we need a lot of people with baseline accessibility skills and a few people with advanced accessibility skills. And so accessibility designers will partner with product teams to divide gaps between baseline knowledge and advanced knowledge. We'll work with individual designers to review designs, collaborate, ideate, and influence research. With a baseline knowledge, designers can be better prepared to ask the right questions and get the help they need when they need it most. In a more mature accessibility organization, each team could have an embedded accessibility design specialist to do this with a lead guiding them. In a less mature or smaller organization, accessibility designers might find themselves being sort of like an in-house accessibility consultant and mentor. Then, when it comes to scaling accessibility in design, accessibility designers involve ourselves in design operations. We want to make sure that accessibility design considerations don't fall on a single person or a small group alone, and design operations help our impact at scale. We need designers across an organization to have that baseline knowledge, right? The skills, the tools, and the means to make their work accessible. We start by preparing our teams with a shared set of knowledge, expectations, and guidelines. Accessibility designers help fill those gaps in knowledge by creating training series and tools. This means introducing designers to what it means to design with disabled users in mind and reframing design thinking to practice inclusion. We seek to set up our designers with a set of knowledge, then give them the best tools to apply that knowledge with plugins, review frameworks, and annotation kits. Speaking of annotation and documentation, Stephanie Walter, AXCON speaker who spoke yesterday, did a great session on this as well, which I would reference if you want to start setting up some tools and frameworks for your org. Similarly, we want to empower designers by supporting an accessible design system. Accessibility designers should be involved with reviewing existing components and documenting what needs to be fixed. Now, last year when I spoke at AXCON, I talked about reviewing design systems for accessibility baseline considerations. We also want to be involved, though, with ensuring that new components and patterns are reviewed for accessibility considerations before release. Accessibility designers should be involved in design system documentation to ensure that how designers build and use components still considers accessibility. Even with a perfectly accessible design system, there are still going to be things that designers are doing in active design processes that require accessibility consideration. A perfectly accessible design system is extremely powerful to making sure a product considers accessibility, but it needs to also live with designers as well. In terms of experience, what we tend to find for roles like mine is that folks tend to be more senior and principal level. In organizations with less accessibility maturity, a principal or senior designer may manage it more independently and work to scale accessibility practices into maturity. Whereas a more mature organization may have more junior and mid-level team members to help contribute to those efforts. So there's a lot of things that accessibility designers tend to do, and we can have a huge impact by touching on designers' work individually, team efforts, design systems, and understanding how these things work together can vary, right, depending on an organization and its maturity. But right now, these are the things I am noticing and that others who do similar work to me notice as well. So maybe you're watching this talk and going, all right, I'm bought in. I want to do what Anna's doing. Yay, welcome. I'm excited. So you might be wondering, how do you become an accessibility designer or even begin to build the skills in your basic practice of design to be more considerate about accessibility considerations? Well, first off, I want to mention that you don't need to be a senior or principal designer to practice these skills. In fact, I encourage folks who are earlier on in their career to get started now because it's so impactful. Everything you do to make things more accessible is always going to be better than doing nothing. And so know that the time to start doing and practicing these things is always going to be now. The other thing I'll mention is if you want a role like mine, or you want to be moving in the accessibility space, you don't necessarily have to be certified to be qualified. Personally, I'm all for certification. It's all about individual choice and, and the ways that they want to approach their accessibility knowledge. But I also want to make sure folks know that this is not a barrier for entry in a role like mine. You don't have to be seeking the title, though, of accessibility designer to make your designs more accessible. I know that my understanding of accessibility has, if I'm honest, I feel like it's been a pretty major competitive advantage. I believe also that it's made me a better designer. I've learned more about semantic code. I'm better prepared to handle deeper levels of user interaction, and I'm more prepared for more inclusive research. So we're gathering information from folks across a larger spectrum and accounting for a wider set of needs while still making sure we serve our users. I believe if I can do this, honestly, anybody can do this. So if you want to get started, here are some tips. Well, first off, listen to disabled people and learn. As designers, it's our job to understand people, their needs, and their problems. Well, similarly, we need to be listening to disabled people. The best way to learn about accessibility is not through an empathy exercise. I cannot understand what it means to be blind by wearing a blindfold for a day. I can't understand what it means to be using a screen reader regularly if I'm only doing it, sometimes to practice. We can't understand what it means to have a disability if we do not personally have that disability. So instead, I want to encourage designers to really take the users and think about their needs because that's what we do best. There are many ways to do this. And the first one I tend to emphasize to folks is just start Googling. These are two videos in my slide here of folks using assistive technology, the first being a screen reader, and adaptive techniques, a mouse stick to interact with an iPad. I found them within 3 minutes of a Google search. And this alone can get you started to understand these types of user interactions. There's a lot of folks out there who want to share ways that they interact with digital experiences and things that they need to use them well. So know that you can use these tools at any time. Secondly, you probably were expecting this. Start getting yourself familiar with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These guidelines have been created with and by people who have disabilities to ensure that digital experiences are accessible. It is important that you're actively learning and listening to people with disabilities to create accessible experiences, but WCAG helps to fill the basic gaps and have a set of standards to get started. In this slide, I have a screenshot showing the WCAG Quick Reference Guide. I talk about this guide almost every time I'm presenting on this subject. Earlier on, I had this open and I would look through my designs and go through each of those items in the Quick Reference Guide and ask myself if I had made sure that I had accounted for that in the design. That said, in the Quick Reference Guide, some folks might feel like it's a lot at first, and I can totally understand that. Another great place to start is with the A11Y Project's accessibility checklist, which I will have in the slide links as well. Third, as designers, research is a core part of how we work. I want to encourage folks to begin becoming comfortable with inclusive research strategies. Collective design teams can really come together and learn from a diverse set of users, including users with disabilities. And that can have a huge impact because bringing people into the fold and showing them that the barriers that are being baked into designs actually stop people from interacting with their experience can really impact people. And so research like this and being able to gather research like this is really helpful. Referencing guidelines like the ones I have here from the inclusive, what are they called? The Inclusive Research Collective. There goes my headphone. The Inclusive Research Collective on Medium can be a great way to start, or you could reference Fable. Fable does some inclusive research work, and they're really, I am under the impression they're fantastic to partner with. I also recommend checking out some of the talks from AXCON too. There was one from Rebecca Tops yesterday that talked about some ways to make inclusive research, make research more inclusive. So there's a lot of resources out there they are building. And so definitely check those out and build that practice. Fourth, all designers, right? We've discussed this already, but all designers should have a baseline understanding of accessibility. You can empower fellow designers to make their work more accessible too. This is an image of me presenting with an organization a few years ago about basic automated auditing of a live experience using ACTS. And I did this in part because I wanted my team to be able to practice these skills themselves. I've been presenting accessible design workshops for years with coworkers and colleagues, and it's a great way for me to dig in deep into a subject I'm interested in, and a great way for me to share the love, share all of the cool things that are out there that we can use and practice. So I encourage you to start your practice and empower other designers with that same set of knowledge so that they can help make a product holistically accessible. We need everybody bought in. We need everybody with a baseline at the very least. And finally, make it known that you want to be an accessibility-focused designer. It's interesting for me, in terms of my career, I've had some fantastic mentors. And I remember the moment when one of my mentors asked me how I wanted to advance my career. And at the time, I had said something along the lines of, well, I probably should get better at, prototyping and advanced interactions and stuff like that. And she looked at me in the face and she said, is that what you want? Is that what you're passionate about? And I said, no, I care about inclusion in design. And she said, go for it, and made the space for me to really focus in on that. And so making it known, sharing it, making it something that people can be aware of so that they can make space for you to do those things is important. You can inform your teams so that you can start practicing these skills and make space for it. You can also start working on building a portfolio with accessibility considerations baked in. Including accessibility considerations in your projects too will start to show that you have a unique skill set and you can begin practicing this at scale. Again, I want to emphasize that you don't have to know everything to start doing this, and everything you do to make your work more accessible and more inclusive is always going to be better than nothing. So share your specialty, make it known, and make it yours. Now, you may have noticed throughout this section, I've included links to different resources. Slides, of course, are available on the AXCON website, so you can reference those there. I've also got a few more resources here as well. We have Adobe's Inclusive Design, Microsoft's Inclusive Design, BBC Global Experience Language, the A11Y project, which I already mentioned, and some folks to follow in accessibility. All of these are super helpful, and all of these programs have built up a really good set of skills for designers to learn about. There's going to be a growing list of resources and tools for inclusive and accessibility-driven designers, so keep an eye on what's coming. The one thing I'll mention that isn't in this slide that I've been recommending more and more to folks is the Stark library. That's Stark, the plugins and the accessibility tools for designers. They've got a library with filtering and searching that makes it really easy to find some accessibility articles and blogs and resources. So also a really great tool. The last thing I'd like to mention is about the difference between accessibility and inclusivity designers. You may have noticed that I was talking about both of these subjects throughout these presentations. I've used both of these terms. Well, I wanted to make sure I touched on the developing definitions I have of these roles and how they might be different. I hope with these that we can, excuse me, that we can encapsulate the current state of accessible and inclusive design roles. Accessibility means designing for users with disabilities and with users who have disabilities. Inclusivity includes that, but it also includes more than that. I see accessibility designers as primarily focusing on designing experiences that are accessible with and for disabled people. These roles, though, can turn into inclusive design roles when an organization has matured their accessibility practice to move beyond basic considerations into broader inclusivity and equity initiatives in design. Inclusive designers make things accessible, but they also make things easy to use and delightful for users with disabilities. Inclusive designers focus on gender equity, racial equity, and creating experiences that are more holistically equitable and usable for folks who are marginalized in many ways. Inclusive design is about really going beyond just compliance alone. Now, with that in mind, I wanted to give us some time for questions and discussion. So I'll get started there.
Great. We have lots of questions that have been added during the presentation. So I'll start out with our top voted one. You addressed this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear you expand. So the question is, shouldn't all designers or roles have accessibility as part of their job description? Do you feel that specialized roles take away from the responsibility of others?
Well, I personally think yes, all designers should have at least a baseline understanding of accessibility in their roles. I also think, though, having specialized roles can be helpful and supportive for designers. I think that every designer is unique in their interests and skill sets. And there are advanced accessibility questions and needs and inclusivity questions and needs that may not always be covered by a baseline set of skills and knowledge. And so having specialist roles can be really helpful for dividing those gaps and for also keeping people in the know on what's happening and what's coming. This is the same logic I think about in terms of like design system designers, for example. We need all designers, right, to think about design systems and components and things at scale. But what is reasonable and possible for a designer to understand and be able to account for? We have accessibility engineers, we have accessibility testers, so why wouldn't we have accessibility designers? The long story short is, I think specialist roles will always need to exist. Different orgs may not have them, but I think there's power in having that support. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but I think that it seems like designers I work with find it helpful to have somebody that they can lean on and talk with for those advanced questions.
Great. Our next question is along the lines of, how do you convince leadership to get on board? So do you have any suggestions on how to convince leadership to allocate resources towards accessibility designers?
Well, I think, there's always that ever perpetual conversation around the business case for accessibility and proving the value of accessibility. And this is kind of where our maturity models start to come in. what tends to happen, and I'll speak to this in terms of what I notice in terms of industry. What tends to happen is leadership starts to notice these things more, again, in testing and development first. And then developers tend to start going, well, I can't fix copy on your input without a content designer, for example. And usually an org starts advocating for more design in that sense. But let me actually try to answer this question with more clarity. I think, as a lot of folks say, selling leadership on accessibility is a dedicated effort. It takes time and continual conversations and patience. Showing user perspectives, first and foremost, can make a huge impact. For example, having a leader kind of understand that people could be completely blocked from like logging in, that starts to show folks that, especially if it's applicable to their specific experience, it starts to show them how significant these barriers can be. That said, I think when I talk about these things, I've always tended to emphasize that we should be working to continually sell leadership, working, always being constantly vigilant, kind, and respectful. And that is true. One new thing I want to add to that is sometimes you have to know when to find a role that makes space for accessibility, because not all organizations come around in time for your career and your interests. And it's important to prioritize yourself. And that isn't something that is very powerful. Not all leadership's going to be bought in or come around. And so I guess this time I really want to emphasize that selling leadership is really about showing them business cases, making sure they understand that how things apply in their experience. They tend to start with testing and dev. And last, to be willing to know that not all leadership teams can be bought in, and not to put yourself in a position where you feel like you're burning the candle at both ends for leadership teams that ignore it. That is not to say that that's happened to me. I've been very lucky, but I've seen it happen to others. And so I want to emphasize that because I've seen a lot of burnout.
And that actually leads us perfectly into the next question. So you just shared a suggestion for managing burnout. This question is from someone who is the one person at their org who is advocating for accessibility. Do you have any other tips or suggestions, resources for people who are managing the burnout?
Oh, that's the $1,000,000 question. I honestly, I mean, first and foremost, these have been some odd years. And so burnout is expected, I think, for all of us. And so, but then there's this extra layer, right, for accessibility and inclusivity advocates, because we tend to find ourselves continually educating and facing ableism and finding that we're going, this is really important sometimes. And then sometimes people don't hear that. That could be rough. I guess to me, to manage that burnout, one, again, there's going to always be orgs, especially now, that are going to care about those skills. And so if you find you've spent months and years and it's not being heard, I say go for a place that will hear you. That said, if I may, I think for burnout, I really emphasize to folks to take real time off, step away. I know it's very wishy, like very fluffy to be like, yeah, just take time off and all of that. But I really want to emphasize how important that is right now, not just for accessibility and inclusivity folks, but for everybody. Take time and don't work and do something fun and feel fulfilled, and you'll come back and feel 10,000 times better. Not to go all mom on everybody here, but I just want to make sure you're all taking care of yourselves.
It's an important message, absolutely. So we received some questions around certifications. So in terms of building up skill sets and building up certifications, Would you recommend the WAS certificate? Are there other certifications that you would recommend that designers pursue?
Yeah, so I will touch on again that I do not think designers have to be certified. I think there's a lot of great ways to learn accessibility skills without it. That said, I'm very about making sure people have the resources and skills and tools they need to learn. And some folks think certifications help them. And it can be a really good way to show your dedication to accessibility. So in terms of foot cramp, goodness gracious. Sorry, that was quite painful. In terms of where I would start is the CPACC or CPAC. I think honestly, that's a really great way to actually start understanding fundamental inclusive design considerations. And you know, I've had designers in my org who have it, other folks who have it. I would start there. The WAS tends to be, it can be quite technical. And so I would say start with the CPACC if you're looking to do that, and then dive into the WAS when you're ready. Now, in terms of other things that designers can do, I will say that there are some great LinkedIn learnings. There might be one coming from a friend of yours sometime in the near future. And there are fantastic books, so many fantastic books and leaders who help write articles on this. And I think for me, that made a huge difference. And go to some meetups, connect with folks. That also, by the way, I'll say helps a lot with burnout in these skills. And as a designer is just to connect with like-minded designers and be like, hey, is this thing happening? What do you think of this thing? That's been huge for me. So know that would be like what you choose to do in terms of learning is important only to me in terms of what works for you. And so again, this is why I say you don't have to be certified to be a great designer that focuses on accessibility, but go for it if it helps you.
Great points. And actually, you referenced something here. So we got lots of questions about how to continue following your work, lots of curiosity about your book coming up, and it sounds like there's some other resources in the mix, like LinkedIn Learning. Can you share a little bit more about your book and how to follow your work in the future?
Oh, thanks everyone for asking. I'm always very flattered. I am obnoxiously active on Twitter. My username is at Anna E, as in Echo Cook, and I'll post a lot of updates there. I would say that's probably the easiest way to stay up to date with the things I'm working on and what's coming out. I probably got a little ahead of myself with the LinkedIn Learning, but I'm just so excited about doing something like that. But yeah, I share resources there. There's a whole A11Y Twitter group I created, so other folks to follow. Gosh, I mean, if y'all want other ways to hear from me, let me know, because I'd love to, make sure. I mean, I'm very flattered. I'd love to make sure that you could hear from me in a way that you'd like and at a schedule that you'd like. So let me know.
Well, what a perfect note to round this out on. That puts us at time. So thank you so much, Anna, for sharing your wisdom and your expertise in the field. And thank you, everyone who joined online and who will be watching this recording later. Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.